All right, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the House Environment and Transportation Committee hearings for Friday, February 16th. Our first bill is HB 481, Delegate Hutchinson, Natural Resources Antlerless Deer Hunting Programs Authorization. If you have a panel, please bring them on up.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Mr. Chair, Madam Chair, and the members of the Environment and Transportation Committee. And first of all, I'd like to thank you for accommodating your schedule to help me with my long afternoon with the end-of-life hearings that will be going on in Health and Government Operations. I'm Delegate Tom Hutchinson, District 37B, and I'm here to present House Bill 481, the Antlerless Deer Program. This bill helps mitigate crop damage caused by the explosive deer populations on the lower eastern shore. Now, as a reminder, last session, this bill passed the House and then passed the Senate with an amendment. Unfortunately, the bill came back to the House on sine die. It was on the calendar, but missed the midnight cutoff. And I would like to point out that this is the exact same bill that was passed last year, and it also includes the Senate amendment from last year, and that was really to limit this to just the existing program, that this program could not be expanded into other areas throughout the state. Passing this bill will help manage the deer population, which will help decrease crop damage on local farms. Crop damage caused by deer is staggering. In many farms, deer can completely devastate an entire crop. In 2019, the Farm Bureaus in the lower eastern shore counties of Somerset, Worcester, Wacomico, created the Doe Harvest Challenge. Dorchester County Farm Bureau began the program in 2022. Currently, the Maryland firearms deer season runs for 2 weeks, beginning the Saturday after Thanksgiving and into early December. The season then reopens for 3 days in early January. And it is my understanding that these 3 days were added by DNR years ago to specifically help address the overabundance of deer. The intent of the program is to entice hunters to return on the January dates to continue to hunt whitetail and sika deer to help reduce the deer population. It is important to note that the hunters must abide by all Maryland gun laws, game laws, tag and register each deer, and stay within their legal bag limit. Additionally, all deer can only be harvested in the participating counties. Not only does this help reduce the deer population and thus reduce crop damage, but in my district in the lower shore counties, deer hunting is a source of food for many families. The hunters can retain the harvest or have the option to donate the harvest to the Maryland Food Bank for no processing fee. I want to emphasize that this is an enticement for hunters to return on the last 3 days of the season, and they cannot harvest more than they are legally allowed during the season. The intent of this bill is to allow this very successful program to continue to help our farmers combat crop damage, to incentivize our hunters to return on the last 3 days of the season, and to help feed families across Maryland. I respectfully ask the committee for a favorable vote on House Bill 481. Thank you.
Chairman.
Good afternoon, members of the Environment and Transportation Committee. My name is Steve Hurley, chairperson for the Antlerless Deer Harvest Committee. The lower shore counties of Wacomico, Worcester, Somerset, and Dorchester have been hosting an annual antlerless deer harvest program during the January rifle hunt. The antlerless deer harvest program was created in an effort to reduce crop damage caused by an overpopulation of deer in these counties. Many farm families, including my own, suffer losses of 30% or more of their total income each year due to deer damage. The purpose of this program is to incentivize hunters to harvest antlerless deer during the late season rifle hunt in January. The hunters that participate in this program can choose to donate the venison to the Maryland Food Bank, with the antlerless deer harvest program covering the cost of processing to help feed the hungry. In 2024, we added a youth category in an effort to educate the youth about the importance of proper deer management, and I must say it was very successful. The program is completely funded by donations from the ag community and ag-related businesses, as well as the Maryland Grain Producers and the Maryland Soybean Board. We're asking for your support to pass this bill so that our family farms can survive these very difficult times dealing with the severe crop damage caused by deer. We feel this is a very successful and effective program and necessary in order to preserve the financial health of the Maryland farm economy. Thank you for your time, and I ask for a favorable report for House Bill 481. Thank you.
Chairman Corbin, Vice Chair Boyce, ENT Committee. For the record, my name is Tyler Huff, and I am the Director of Government Relations for the Maryland Farm Bureau. We are here today in support of HB 481, which would help allow a very successful management program to continue on the lower shore. Maryland farmers face over $10 million worth of loss due to crop damage a year, with roughly 77% of that crop damage being accumulated to deer. We have an extremely overpopulated deer herd in the state of Maryland, and unfortunately, our traditional recreational hunting is not the solution to this problem. Maryland farmers are the ones that face the brunt of this overpopulation and lose at times their entire fields. And in a tough financial situation and volatile markets, that makes it even more difficult for these farmers to stay profitable and keep land in agricultural production. The members of Maryland Farm Bureau urge a favorable report. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee. My name is Lindsay Thompson. I'm here today on behalf of the Maryland Grain Producers Association in support of House Bill 481. As Delegate Hutchison said, this bill got caught up on the last calendar right before Sine Die last year. And so we are just looking to ensure that this very successful program on the lower shore is able to continue. I'd like to address a couple of the drafting issues that we have been brought to our attention. So last year, this bill was originally in the killing contest section of the law that Delegate Stein passed in or sponsored in 2020. And at the advice of the Department of Natural Resources, we moved that from the killing contest to this section 10-404, which precludes someone from offering wild game in the state for barter, sale, or exchange. And so because the hunters who participate in this program are offered a raffle ticket, we are just trying to clarify within the law that this is allowable for them to have a raffle ticket in exchange for harvesting a deer that they are able to donate. The other thing I wanted to point out is, yes, farmers do have other options for the culling of deer herds, but the number one issue that we hear is that once you have 1 or 2 deer in your own freezer, they don't have an outlet for anything to do with them. And so with this program, Maryland Grain Producers funds between $6,000 and $10,000 a year for the processing of these deer that then is donated directly to the Maryland Food Bank or local food pantries. And so it provides the hunters and the farmers with an outlet for the deer going to a good cause. And so we would urge your favorable report. Thank you.
Thank you all very much. We have first question from Delegate Ruth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Delegate, for this bill. My question is for Lindsay and Tyler. And Lindsay, I know I visited your farm this summer, and I personally saw the damage that the deer are causing. And I wondered if either or both of you could like quantify in some way that the damage that's causing. I know there's a lot of variation depending on location and the size of the farm, but like what is the economic impact of the deer on the farms?
So I can give you very specific information for our farm because I just submitted all of our information to our accountant for our taxes. And I'd also be happy to provide the yield maps that demonstrate this very well. We had a total loss on 13 of our 212 acres. And so for our family, just on input cost alone, that was a $13,000 loss to our family farm. And we are a very small hold farm as far as grain production is concerned. And so if you heard the other testimony, it's upwards of 30% for some of these farmers, especially on the lower shore, where they have the sicca deer populations that are very destructive.
Thank you. And input cost, you mean the cost of the seed and whatever that goes into it, not counting lost profit?
So it would be the input costs, and then which in our case is about $600 per acre for corn, and then what we would have stood to make off of that, which was the additional 400.
Okay, thank you. And Tyler, did you have any additional?
No, I think Lindsay did a fantastic job. I'll yield to her.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, may I ask one more question? Thank you. Can you explain why antlerless deer?
So antlerless deer would in general be referring to female deer. You can have antlerless male deer after they drop their antlers at a certain time of the year, but that would generally not occur in January. It happens more February, March timeframe. And so we're trying to incentivize hunters to harvest antlerless deer or the female deer, because the hunting culture in Maryland is very much after big antlered bucks, and that is not an effective way to manage the population. Quality Deer Management Association estimates that you need to cull approximately 30 to 40% of the female deer in your farm population in order to just remain stagnant with the population, because many does, as they age, will actually produce twins and triplets.
Thank you so much.
Vice Chair Boyce.
So much, Mr. Chair, and thank you for bringing this bill back. I'm sorry that it died at the end of session. Can you explain or go step by step about the contest? Like, how do people register? Is there money involved? Does someone pay for a raffle? Is a raffle given and then there's a trade-off given? So just help us understand the contest.
There's no entry fee. If you harvest an antlerless deer, you bring it into one of our checking stations and we give you a ticket, which goes in for a drawing toward a cash prize. And the youth hunters, we offer them a quail hunt, all expense paid quail hunt for them to enter.
So I shoot a deer too. I get a raffle ticket from the organization.
Yes.
And then that is put into the hat to draw.
Yes.
So where does the funds or the incentives
the monies, it's all coming from the ag community. We send out letters to all the
donations?
yes,
Okay.
yes, all the farmers that have problems, they all have a vested interest in this, so they all usually donate money, and ag businesses that survive on the ag income, and also the Maryland grain producers and Maryland Sugar Board.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, I do not see any further questions. So that concludes the bill hearing on HB 41. We'll turn now to HB 590, Delegate Hutchinson, Boating Migratory Waterfowl Season Prohibited Acts. Please go ahead when you're ready.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and members of the Environment and Transportation Committee for the opportunity to present House Bill 590, Hunting Migratory Waterfowl Season Prohibited Actions, with an amendment, and I do believe the committee did receive the amendment this morning. My name is Delegate Tom Hutchinson, District 37B, and I'm here as the chair of the Dorchester County delegation. House Bill 590 is a matter of public safety during the waterfowl season, and a bill that further clarifies right to hunt laws. So in Maryland, many hunters enjoy the migratory waterfowl season from either their stationary or blind site, usually without any interruptions. Currently, our law states that during the migratory hunting season, a person cannot fish within 500 yards of a stationary blind. It was actually interesting this morning, I realized that of DNR's opposition to this bill, and I've amended it with the hope that it may address their opposition. The bill originally prohibited anyone on a vessel, and a vessel has a very wide definition in law. Really, the issue that we have is with kayakers, canoers, and paddleboarders who either whether it's they want to go out and enjoy it, or they see these decoys that are floating out on the water, and they're coming within range, and they're very unsafe range of the duck blinds. And my hunters have gone back to DNR to try to get some enforcement on this, and they said there is no law that is prohibiting these kayakers or recreational individuals to be out there on the water. So that's really the nature of the bill. The bill's been amended to really address non-motorized vessels and really to protect really those that are out there is sometimes unbeknownst to them what is actually occurring in the duck blinds. We don't want anybody getting hit with any shot or accidentally being shooting. So this would only prohibit the, kayakers, paddle boards, canoes from operating within a certain distance of the blinds. And I respectfully ask the committee for a favorable vote on House Bill 590. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions on this bill? Delegate Teresa.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And can you explain the danger that the danger is that they could be shot, or the danger is something about the duck lines? What is, can you explain?
They potentially could be shot, if they're if a hunter was, shooting up in the air at a duck, the shot could come down and hit the kayaker, the canoe, or the paddleboarder that's there. It also just interferes their ability and potentially even scares the birds away.
And can you explain the thinking behind the 500 yards? I know we've had many bills where we've been
only because there is current statute right now that says that you can't fish within 500 yards. So if they were coming out on their canoes or kayaks and they had a fishing rod, DNR could stop them. So that's statute right now that it's 500 yards. So we're consistent with that.
Right, but is 500 needed for safety?
I would think so, just in terms of the range that, shot could travel if they were to be shooting.
Okay, thank you.
Delegate Jacobs.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Delegate Hutchinson, the blinds that you're talking about are fixed. They're not floating blinds or
Stationary
they're
blinds.
stationary blinds that have been leased for years.
That is correct. So they give you,
Basically, most of them have been there for years and people lease that spot. Sort of like a little house out on the water,
exactly. They'll go out there on their boat, put their boat, hide it underneath, climb up, put their decoys out.
Yeah, so the issue is that some of these paddle boarders and kayakers are scurrying up a little too close. That this bill is really to prevent any bad things from happening,
That is correct.
right?
Correct.
Thank you.
Delegate Foley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Delegate, could you, I don't see the amendment. Could you just briefly describe what the amendment does that you said that addresses DNR's concern?
What it is doing is changing the word vessel and changing it to non-motorized watercraft. And that does not include a sailboat.
Okay. And that addresses the concern raised in the DNR letter?
I don't know. I discovered this early this morning. I've not had a chance to meet with DNR to talk to them
Oh,
about
okay.
that.
Because my understanding from their letter is that this has to do with prohibiting vessels from being in navigable federal waters. And that could be unconstitutional.
I did see that. That's why I need to go back to DNR
Okay,
and the
great.
Attorney
Okay.
General. to check
Okay,
that.
thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Delegate Love.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, Delegate.
Good
Nice to see you. So these blinds, are they obvious to your average kayaker or paddleboarder?
You would hope so, or would think so. I mean, many of them are out in the middle of the maybe a creek on stilts, covered with natural material as a camouflage for them. Some are on the banks of the shore, and sometimes they don't realize that may be a duck blind the way it's camouflaged or hidden.
And so that's my concern. If somebody doesn't know, I mean, I used to duck hunt and some of them were not obvious to the regular individual. So you're catching folks up in something that they don't even know that they're crossing.
Completely understand that. And really the issue is when it has been occurring, and in some cases it's occurring multiple times, almost to affect their right to hunt, that they may be coming out. And so when they go back to DNR for any type of help to prevent that from happening, DNR doesn't have anything in statute to be able to prevent them from doing that.
Got it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Delegate Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the education on duck hunting. I still can't get a picture of where these, what'd you call them, where they can be.
Stationary blinds
Where
or,
they can be. Does DNR approve where they can be?
so there are many that you'll see just out in the middle of a creek. They're on pilings, they're built. Literally, a lot of them, you can drive a little John boat underneath of them, climb up. And they need to lease those, and they have has long history of these leased sites. But then there's also areas where on private property, they can be right on the shoreline along the banks of the creeks.
So DNR does regulate where they go.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Delegate Teresa, second bite at the apple on Friday afternoon.
Thank you. Mr. It just really quickly, is DNR putting them in? Are they on, they're on public property or private?
It could be both, actually. So if it's in the middle of the channel, it's being leased through DNR.
Okay, but
And-
DNR, okay.
And they're not putting them in. You're getting the opportunity to do that,
Okay.
and then the hunters go and build what they want to build.
Okay, thank you.
Delegate Jacobs, second bite at the apple
All right,
on the
just-
second bill.
Yeah, I
on Friday
understand.
afternoon.
It's an important point, Mr. Chairman, that these are permitted by the Department of Natural Resources.
I'm sorry, I didn't.
These blinds are permitted but you have to receive a permit in order to use that site.
Absolutely,
So the individual could build it, the department doesn't build it,
correct,
but the department permits it.
correct.
Thank you.
Okay, Delegate Baker.
Thank you. I guess you threw in the word creek there, and I guess I do have a little concern there. Up our way, we have a lot of canoers. We also have duck hunters, bird hunters. Our creek's not 500 yards wide. So if I'm floating down the creek fishing, I'm certainly I'm going past that blind.
But if you're fishing, it's actually illegal today.
I'm gonna fish in that creek. I don't think it's illegal for me to fish in the creek
Actually, there is statute. I don't have the exact
unless I'm
section,
fishing without a license.
but there really is a statute right now that you cannot fish within 500 yards of a duck blind.
Well, I'm gonna have trouble with this one because like I said, up in Western Maryland, many of our creeks at places aren't even 100 yards wide. So if this is gonna have an impact on waters in my district, I'm gonna have a hard time supporting it.
I understand. Thank you.
We have canoers. Many canoers on all of our creeks up that way.
And as I said,
Kayakers.
I haven't gone back to DNR to see whether even
Okay.
this amendment
Thank you.
would suffice the issue. Thank you.
Great, seeing no further questions, that concludes the bill hearing on HB 590.
Thank you.
We're going to jump a little out of order to help one of our colleagues with a nicer committee chair who doesn't need to be here. HB 561, Delegate Watson, tree expert licenses.
Good afternoon, Chair Corman, Vice Chair Boyce. It's good to see Chair Corman again. I know appropriations misses him and our loss is your gain. I am here today to present HB 561, tree expert licenses and renewal fee alterations. This bill seeks to solve the same problem as last year's tree trimming bill that I presented to you, which was HB 612. That you passed favorably and it passed on the House floor. However, it didn't pass the Senate. Last year, the committee heard, and we don't need to really go over it again, I'm sure, but about the dangerous nature of the tree trimming industry, not just to those who work in the field, but also to the environment itself and to consumers when trees are cared for improperly. So a significant cause for concern has been the lack of oversight, putting workers and landowners at risk due in part to the Department of Natural Resources' slow response time in dealing with complaints and the lack of staffing, resources, and oversight. So after extensive meetings in the interim with the Maryland Arborists Association, with the Department of Natural Resources and other industry members, we drafted a bill that addresses the same problem we were trying to tackle last year, but this time it has support from all stakeholders. HB 561 as drafted removes the current cap on DNR to increase fees for the application and renewal of tree expert licenses by allowing DNR the ability to increase fees, which are currently set at $15, not even enough to cover the cost of processing one application. We provide additional resources to DNR that they can then provide better oversight of licensees. And there are two amendments which you have. The first is technical, and the second is one that the industry requested to specify a cap on the cost of application and renewal fees so that's not unlimited. The committee has written testimony in support of the bill from the Arborist Association, and Justin Bowers from the Department of Natural Resources here with me today to explain his position. I respectfully request a favorable recommendation from the committee.
Good afternoon, members of the committee. As the sponsor said, my name is Justin Bowers. I'm Deputy Director of the Maryland Forest Service, and we wholeheartedly support the bill that the sponsor has put forward. The Licensed Tree Expert Program is one of our most important statewide programs regulating tree care work in the state. Puts a requirement on any individual that practices tree care to meet a certain set of criteria and to pass a rigorous exam administered by the Department of Natural Resources in order to advertise themselves as licensed tree experts. We find that this is an important regulatory program because there is a lot of risks both to the consumer, to the public, and to the care and protection of our resources when the work of tree care is performed by non-credible practitioners. So this program is something that we've had in place for many years. However, our resources in order to administer and to pursue investigations and to generally enforce the law have not kept pace with the growth of the program. And that's something that we expect to see more and more over the coming years as the industry continues to grow. And recently we have made the exam available in Spanish, which of course in our market has been has come with a number of additional attendees in our exams. So we're seeing that number climb steadily. I believe between fiscal year 22 and 23, we saw a 300% increase in the number of LTEs that were registered. So currently we have less than 2 full-time staff administering the program. And the rate, the ability to change rates would allow us to keep our revenues more in line with what is required to administer the program. And of course, the addition or the requirement of providing proof and to carry workers' compensation, which is already a requirement of the business, that allows us to at least have a little bit more assurances that our licensed tree experts are working and the staff working under those licensed tree experts are covered by those plans.
Great, thank you very much. Are there any questions for the sponsor or the panel? Delegate Baker.
How do we go about getting a copy of current fees, projected increase in fees? Is that in the information we've been provided? I don't see it.
You want to answer?
I mean, I'd like to know how much you're going to be raising fees by.
The current fees are $15.
It's actually, I'm sorry,
This is in the bill.
this is what we're.
This is the cap.
Well, fees currently are $30 for an original license fee and $20 biannually for renewals. And we do not currently have anything as far as how much revenue we're collecting with the current rates and projections, but we can develop them.
Yeah, I'd like to see the projections. I mean, approve the bill, you may come in with 1,000% increase. So I would like to see how much you're going to be increasing them by. Thank you.
There is a cap on the bill fees that can be charged. The examination fee is $45 cap. The initial license fee is a $55 cap, and the renewal fee is a $100 cap.
Hey, would you send that to us, please?
The committee has the amendment with those numbers in it.
Thank you.
Any further questions for? Okay, thank you both very much. That
Thank you.
concludes the bill on HB 561. We'll now turn to our colleague Delegate Lehman, HB 457, Environment Synthetic Turf Chain of Custody.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, Madam Vice Chair, and esteemed colleagues. For the record, I'm Delegate Mary Lehman. I am requesting your favorable consideration again this year of a bill to track the movement of synthetic turf playing fields. That is HB 457. This committee and the full House have passed this legislation twice. So you have agreed with the need to find out where these turf fields go when they are moved, typically at the end of their 8 to 10 year lifespan. The bill requests two things of synthetic turf field owners. First, that they report to the Maryland Department of Environment where these fields are located at the time the law takes effect, and then going forward when new fields are installed. And secondly, owners must report to MDE where the fields go if they are moved from one facility to another, which is a very rare situation, or when they are disposed of because they have reached the end of their life. MDE will post this information about field locations and movement on its website. So this year's bill is almost identical to the version of the bill that passed last year, with one exception. There's a friendly amendment suggested and supported by the Turf Field Managers Association, which I consider basic disclosure. And it just requires that the seller of a synthetic turf field provide to the buyer prior to the sale information related to the cost of maintenance and removal, and the requirement, assuming that this bill passes and becomes law, that then it will in fact be their responsibility to tell the state of Maryland where the fields are moving if and when they move. As you all already know, synthetic turf fields pose an enormous solid waste disposal challenge, given their size, given their number, and the fact that there are no known disposal sites in Maryland that will accept them. Violators of the reporting requirement will first be issued a written notice of violation by MDE. If they do not become compliant, they can possibly be issued an administrative penalty that does not exceed $5,000. Mr. Chair, I do want to take a moment to, as an aside, to say we know what we do right now in 2024 about synthetic turf playing fields in Maryland, the number and the location, because of a tireless group of volunteers who have been basically canvassing and combing this state for 3 years now. These are Sierra Club volunteers that have now identified 437 synthetic turf fields in 19 counties in Baltimore City, and that number is growing. But I want to give a shout out to them and a thanks. Because of them, we know what we do, but there is more to learn, especially about where these fields go at the end of their life. This is not a small problem. Thank you for your past support of the bill, and I ask again for your favorable consideration. Thank you.
You want to say about
Whoever wants to go next, please
you want to
proceed.
ask about the student? Sorry, thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Corman, Vice Chair Boyce, and members of the committee. Thanks for this opportunity to talk about House Bill 457, why it's a good bill and why it deserves your support. For the record, my name is Diana Conway. I live in Montgomery County, and I'm the president of Safe Healthy Playing Fields. SHPFI is a 501c3 all-volunteer nonprofit, and our mission is to equip communities and policymakers with the facts and peer-reviewed published research on synthetic turf fields versus grass fields. I want to thank Delegate Lehman for bringing this bill forward. And as we know, the world is figuring out waste management is a challenge, and it's getting harder and more urgent. This bill offers an elegant solution for a class of products that is currently unregulated used plastic turf fields. As a class, these synthetic fields represent significant concerns for both their volume and their toxicity for the communities hosting them. And as the delegate referred to, the Sierra Club math essentially says we have 100,000 tons of the stuff in the state now, and the numbers are growing and they're being removed and taken elsewhere.
So the world is full of chains of custody, from the Amazon driver taking a photo of the package at your door, to the carefully tracked exhibit in litigation, to the proverbial library book. So it's not rocket science, and everyone is already trained. So HB 457 sets up the Maryland Department of Environment to say, tell MDE where your field is, and then when it's time to move it, tell MDE who's got it next. In thinking about today, I was trying to figure out a different approach, and I want to formulate our argument as a question, which is, if you're taking out a synthetic turf field, and if the place the field is going next, if it's not illegal and it's not embarrassing, then what's the holdup? Why will you not disclose where it's going? So we know the fields are moved every 8 to 10 years. I will be distributing to your offices this afternoon a handout from the Philadelphia Inquirer 6 weeks ago, ran an extensive story on thousands of fields across Pennsylvania farms. Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Patrick Coakley, and I'm the Vice President of the Maryland Turfgrass Council. The MTC primary focus is supporting research and education in the turfgrass industry. Our membership encompasses all areas of turfgrass, including landscape, lawn care, sports turf, golf, and sod producers. We are made up of turf managers and Maryland-based companies and suppliers that support the industry. We are here today in support of Maryland House Bill 457. This bill is simply about transparency. For reference, Camden Yards is roughly 130,000 square feet, or 3 acres. The Ravens football field just inside the lines is 75,000 square feet, or 1.72 acres. If fields of this size are synthetic turf, they should be replaced every 5 to 7 years, depending on the amount of use. So where does synthetic turf go when it is replaced? Who is responsible for making sure it is disposed of in a legal and responsible manner? In our industry, we have seen and heard the stories of turf graveyards where piles of old synthetic turf is stored indefinitely because nobody knows where to put it or wants to pay to have it removed. Or it is illegally dumped in random remote spots, sometimes dumped on farmland with or without landowners' permission. The intention of this bill is to simply track the chain of custody when the fields are replaced. So if piles of synthetic turf are discovered, the party that disposed of the material can be held responsible. This will protect every entity involved in the project of replacing a field. The school or municipality buying the synthetic turf will go into the purchase understanding the future expense of replacement. The contractors bidding on the job will better understand the responsibilities. The synthetic turf manufacturers will be protected from wrongful prosecution and have the opportunity to educate their customers. I'm available for questions. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chairman Corman and members of the House Environment and Transportation Committee. For the record, my name is Nicole Sherry. I am the past president of the Mid-Atlantic Sports Field Managers Association and current head groundskeeper for the Baltimore Orioles. We're here to support the passage of HB 457 entitled Environment Synthetic Turf Chain of Custody. For the committee's consideration and review, we've also submitted our written testimony. I'm here to answer any questions that you may have. As a supporter of this legislation's last session, we would like to take this opportunity to thank the bill sponsor for reintroducing it. As written, this bill requires the Maryland Department of the Environment to establish a system to track the chain of custody of synthetic turf installed on sports fields and playing fields in the state. The transparency due to this bill allows end users to better understand the investments they make and the long-term costs while protecting them from potential liability. MASMA and MTC represent members in the field of sports turf managers, landscapers, golf, sod producers, and commercial residential lawn care services. Our members develop and maintain safe and aesthetically pleasing playing fields for schools, universities, professional fields, parks, recreation, and parks and recreation departments across the state and the Mid-Atlantic region. More than ever, we are doing our part to ensure that we are conducting sustainable practices to support Maryland's continued efforts in protecting the environment. We believe that House Bill 457 is taking a critical step forward in acting transparency, and accountability for those responsible for the removal, transportation, disposal, or acceptance of synthetic turf. For Maryland, this bill would also mitigate or prevent the risks of illegal dumping. In conclusion, we respectfully urge this committee to issue a favorable report of House Bill 457. Thank you.
Thank you all very much. First question is from Delegate Ruth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Delegate Lehman, I don't know if you have seen the Synthetic Turf Council testimony. I wondered if you wanted to address that. Have you had a chance to see that or?
Well, I have not, but I think it's similar to last year, and they're going to bring up concerns about the minimum size field that this should apply to. And you know, we've been talking with them for 5 years. I think if their representatives here, she can attest to the fact that we have, you know, tried to negotiate in good faith and do what's best. We do not want to exempt a lot of these fields for the obvious reasons you've heard about, the impact on the environment, the materials those fields are made of. So thank you for the question. But we think this is a good bill, and it is, with the exception of the amendment I talked about on disclosure. It's the same bill that this committee and the full House supported last year.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any further questions? I do not see any, so thank you. We will now turn to some virtual favorable witnesses. We have Martha Ainsworth from the Maryland Sierra Club, and if she's available, we have Megan Stallard from the MCPS Student Climate Action Council. I know she's juggling schoolwork.
There we go.
I am.
Let's have
Good
Megan.
afternoon.
Yeah, let's have Megan go first if she's free, since I know she's got other things to do. Go ahead, Megan.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, Chair Corman, Vice Chair Boyce, and members of the committee. My name is Megan Stallard, and I'm a freshman at Poolesville High School in Montgomery County. I am testifying today in support of Bill HB 457 on behalf of the inaugural MCPS Student Climate Action Council, sanctioned by the Board of Education to advise the board on sustainability issues and support student sustainability initiatives. We represent the students of MCPS who are fighting for our future. As a council, we have been researching synthetic turf for the past several months to put together a comprehensive report about synthetic turf and natural grass. We've researched the impacts of synthetic turf on human and environmental health through a variety of different lenses, including heat and toxicity concerns. Most notably, our research has shown that synthetic turf fields contain carcinogens and endocrine disruptors, which makes it incredibly important to know where they're being discarded. We've tried unsuccessfully to research the disposal of synthetic turfs. Unfortunately, there is no tracking on where they go when they are replaced. Too often, it's left a mystery. A synthetic turf field is about 440,000 pounds of plastic and infill. That is a lot of waste to disappear without an explanation. In addition, synthetic turf supporters often claim that turf fields are recycled, but there is no evidence to support that. We simply want the facts. Who has custody of synthetic turfs when? This bill won't ban synthetic turfs or even regulate them. It will simply give us, the students, the facts about what happens to those fields. Our generation will have to clean up this mess. At least give us a place to begin. We strongly urge a favorable report in committee on Bill HB 457. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you, Megan. I have an important question for you. What high school do you go to? Oh, did you drop?
Oh, no, sorry about that. I go to Poolesville High School.
Awesome. Well, thank you for joining us.
All right.
Please get back to high school, and we will move on to Martha Ainsworth from the Sierra Club. Thanks again, Megan.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chairman Corman, Vice Chair Boyce, and committee members. That's a hard act to follow. I'm Martha Ainsworth, Chair of the Maryland Sierra Club Zero Waste Team, speaking in favor of HB 457 on behalf of our 70,000 members and supporters of the Maryland Sierra Club. HB 457 addresses a serious plastic waste problem posed by the lack of transparency and accountability for disposal of synthetic turf. Since the last session, Sierra Club volunteers have updated our inventory of synthetic turf fields in Maryland to estimate their waste. As of January 2024, we found 437 synthetic turf playing fields in 19 counties in Baltimore, which is about 40 more than last year. We were able to estimate the size of 403 of them, and based on the characteristics of the average playing field, these fields amount to more than 79,000 tons of plastic carpet and infill, more than 144,000 cubic yards of infill, which is the equivalent of more than 4,800 30-yard dumpsters, and 28.9 million square feet of plastic carpet. That's 663 acres of carpet, the equivalent of a circle that's more than 1.1 miles across. This is the waste that will be generated when these fields are replaced over the next decade. But we don't know the fate of the fields that have already been removed, whether they were reused, repurposed, stockpiled, landfilled, or dumped. Our inventory posted on a website will serve as a starting point for MDE in tracking the waste if this bill passes. Accountability for proper disposal of synthetic turf and infill requires a chain of custody that is publicly disclosed. This bill will document the fate of the waste and serve as a deterrent to dumping. Sierra Club respectfully requests a favorable report on HB 457. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for this witness? Okay, thank you again. We'll now turn to our in-person unfavorable witness, Melanie Taylor, Synthetic Turf Council.
Mr. Chairman, could I take a quick point of personal privilege to
Sure.
thank all of my witnesses, but Nicole Sherry has opening day in about 6 weeks, I think, for the Orioles, and I'm just really grateful that she could take the time to be here today. Thank you.
Awesome. Go O's, but let's check on the health of those pitchers also. We have an in-person unfavorable witness, Melanie Taylor, from the Synthetic Turf Council.
Good afternoon, Chair Corman, Vice Chair Boyce, members of the committee. My name is Melanie Taylor, and I'm the President and CEO of the Synthetic Turf Council. Today, I'm here to testify to House Bill 457 and the proposed language to the legislation. As a representative of the synthetic turf industry, we greatly appreciated the opportunity to meet with the bill sponsor and to provide our perspective. However, we continue to have strong concerns about House Bill 457's proposed language. Even so, today I would like to discuss and focus on what may help make the bill, should it become law, clearer and more enforceable. First, we agree that this bill encourages sustainability and proper end-of-life handling of synthetic turf systems. We believe that the most effective way to track a synthetic turf field is by identifying one responsible party at each point along the chain. As written, the bill defines custodian as 3 different parties, which may cause some confusion and duplication in the reporting. Second, we agree that transparency and accountability are necessary and achievable when industry standards are considered. So therefore, we recommend a minimum threshold of 75,000 square feet, which is the minimum size of a standard sports field. I welcome the opportunity to meet with the committee and to discuss how synthetic turf fields continue to be a safe and sustainable solution for committees, particularly when land use, water, and access to sports and parks can be limited. We look forward to working with the committee, members of the Maryland community, issue experts, and more on this legislation. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you. Are there any questions for this witness? Delegate Tarasa.
Can you help me understand why you wouldn't want the smaller amount fields to be, I mean, this is just a reporting bill.
Well, as defined, we're looking at sports and play fields. Those are the 2 definitions of the bill. Anything below that can be very variable of the application. So a residential application is obviously very small. But when we look at play fields, they can vary from, I mean, they're really not going to go under 20,000 square feet. And that depends on the size of the property that a school may have. So those play fields, sports fields, are in that range. So at a minimum, 20,000 to 50,000, 50,000 to 75,000 might be a larger play field. But sports field, a traditional sports field starts at 75.
But why wouldn't you want to report on the others?
On the landscape, for example.
Why do you think under 75? I thought you said you wanted 75,000.
That is our minimum for a sports field, yes.
Okay, but you just said that you could have them at 25,000 or 50,000, but why would you not want to report on them below 75?
It is really just, so 20,000 square foot playfield could certainly be reported under the legislation. I would say, I think in our written testimony, we mentioned residential landscape, and those applications can last 15 to 20 years. So we're really not seeing a lot of movement of those residential types of applications.
Okay, thank you.
Any additional questions? Okay, thank you very much. That concludes the bill here on HB 457. We'll now turn to HB 497, Delegate Hornberger, hunting non-resident Sika deer stamp. And I know we have Dan Smith from his office representing Delegate Hornberger.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. We are starting out on House Bill 497. Is that correct? Great. House Bill 497, hunting non-resident Sika deer stamp fee alteration. All that the bill does is increase from 25 to 100 of the fee for out-of-state hunters. So this will not directly affect your constituents' pockets. There's a little bit of nuance with the numbers as discussed on page 2 of the fiscal note. It assumes about 25% elasticity with out-of-state purchases. So in other words, the increase will have about a 25% effect on out-of-state hunters as discussed on page 2 of the fiscal note. And then there's a 3 times multiplier for federal funds for the Federal Aid and Wildlife Restoration Fund. And then the increase for the state funds is for the Wildlife Management and Protection Fund. Again, as discussed on page 2 of the fiscal note, the total effect is estimated to be about $368,500, and that's really all there is to it. If there's any specific questions, I can try to answer them, and if not, we'll get back to your offices. Thank you.
Delegate Baker.
I've never asked 3 different presenters in committee testimony.
And we're only halfway through the list of bills.
Until today. Anyhow, this has no effect on residents of the state of Maryland for a license increase.
Correct.
Okay.
This will only be an increase if you're.
Okay, so my question is, does Virginia have Sika deer? Any other state have Sika deer?
Sure. So I believe that Delaware does.
Okay.
I don't know about Virginia off the top of my head.
Because I always thought we worked on reciprocity.
Sure.
So how will this be with reciprocity? If Marylanders want to go to Delaware to hunt Sika deer, what do they pay for their Sika deer stand?
Yeah, sure. So in Delaware, I believe it's 50 for non-residents and 20 for in-residents, but I think that might be for deer in general. I didn't see specifically for Sika, but I'd be happy to provide you that information if you'd like to know.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Delegate Bruce.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for presenting this bill. I don't know if you can answer these questions. It's okay if you can't, but my understanding is there's a thriving tourism industry for people coming from out of state to hunt the Sika deer because of the unique nature of them. Is that correct?
Yes.
And so, and the funds, as you mentioned, they're matched by Pittman Robinson. I think I have that right. Is that correct? And so those funds are then used for what?
Yeah, so DNR would probably be able to provide more direct specifics, but from my understanding, it's broadly about related conservation efforts that the estate money is also.
Thank you so
collected for.
much.
Yes.
Okay, we have another in-person favorable witness, Lindsay Thompson, Maryland Grain Producers Association. Let's just get her going and then I'll get you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee. My name is Lindsay Thompson here on behalf of the Maryland Grain Producers Association, favorable with amendments on House Bill 497. So I'm going to answer a couple of the questions that have been asked. So the majority of the Sika deer population on the Delmarva Peninsula is concentrated on the lower eastern shore of Maryland. So the majority of the harvest and the population is in Maryland. So if people are traveling to come hunt Sika deer, they're coming to Maryland. We have the only wild Sika deer herd in the country. And it is the only non-native invasive species in the country that is a protected regulated game mammal. So because of the very unique nature, this has been added to a lot of these hunting challenges, right? Where people go and harvest an elk or a moose or a mule deer. So they've been added to these kind of grand slam lists, right? So to give you an idea of what it would cost a Maryland resident to go to Maine to harvest a moose, $585 for a non-resident stamp. And in Colorado, you're going to pay $651 for a non-resident elk stamp on top of your non-resident hunting license. So we would like to propose actually an increase in that funding. And I'm going to amend my amendment in light of what the Senate passed out just this afternoon. So the Senate committee passed it out at $200. I had also asked for some of that funding to be designated specifically to venison donation programs, given the very destructive nature of Sika deer. However, we are told that there's some legal issues with that and the Pittman-Robertson matching. So I will work that out with DNR behind the scenes. Thank you.
Thank you. Delegate Naraki.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is really simple. This is just kind of to piggyback on what Delegate Baker was saying. So I have a constituent that has a lot of cousins from Virginia. They hunt Sika deer. And I would just want to know that same, he asked about Delaware, but I'd love to know that same information about Virginia as well, if you could, please.
Any further questions? Delegate Jacobs.
All right now. So neither one of you can answer this. But technically, the Sika deer is really an elk from the elk family. It's not from the deer family. It's actually a descendant of the elk family. Isn't that correct?
That is correct.
Yeah, thank you.
Delegate Stewart.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you all for coming. I really like the Senate amendment. My question is there a cap on the federal matching dollars? Like if we put it at 500, like Maine or Colorado or whatever, will we still get the federal matching dollars for 500, or at a certain point they say that's too high?
I do not know off the top of my head, but that's a good question. I'd be happy to find that out for you.
Okay.
In general, it's a 3-to-1 match,
Right,
but
yeah.
I don't know if there is a cap on the total dollar that they will match.
Yeah, it seems like we could be leaving money on the table even with 200, but and then my second question, if I could, Mr. Chair, could you explain to me a little bit about what the enforcement looks like? I want to make sure people can't, if there's a big price differential between in-state and out-of-state, that people can't, like some of Delegate Naraki's cousins, Virginia, like he mentioned, that they can't, sort of say that they're, Maryland residents on some sort of form and then get a stamp that's in-state and pay less.
I personally can't speak to that, but I'm sure the DNR would know.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
Okay. That concludes the bill hearing on HB 497. We'll turn right into HB 562. Also Delegate Hornberger being represented by Dan Smith, Special Chesapeake Bay and Coastal Sport Fishing License Non-Residents License Fee. What could this be about?
Alrighty, for the record, thank you again, Mr. Chair. Dan Smith with Delegate Kevin Hornberger's office on House Bill 562, Special Chesapeake Bay and Coastal Sport Fishing License, Non-Residents License Fee. Similar, but a little bit more simple than the last bill. It increases the Chesapeake Bay and Coastal Sport Fishing License for non-residents from 50 to 100. The numbers on the fiscal note take a more inelastic assumption. So in other words, the number that actually is purchased won't change based on the fee increase, according to the Bill Drafting Office and Legislative Services. And this would be an increase into the Fisheries Research and Development Fund. And that's basically it. Same deal as last time. I will take any questions I can answer, but if not, we'd be happy to get back to you.
Great, thank you. Any questions on this one? Okay, thank you. Have a great rest of your afternoon.
Thank you.
We'll now turn to the Vice Chair, HB 512, Natural Resources, Fish and Fisheries Reporting Requirements.
Thank you and good Friday afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the Environment and Transportation Committee. For the record, I am Regina T. Boyce, representing HB 512, Fish and Fisheries Reporting Requirements. HB 512 requires certain persons licensed or regulated by the Department of Natural Resources to submit reports as per regulations set by the Secretary of Natural Resources. This legislation codifies the current practice of electronically reporting harvests by commercial fishermen. Incomplete and absent reports hinder DNR from managing fisheries optimally, impacting federal programs such as CARES and federal disaster determinations, as well as reducing available grant funds for fisheries management. DNR initiated the FACTS electronic reporting system in 2012 for blue crab harvesters and expanded it to include other groups like finfish harvesters, charter captains, and shellfish harvesters. FACTS offers easy access and real-time harvest information through a mobile web application, aiding both captains and fisheries managers. HB 512 encourages accountability and timely reporting, utilizing the FACTS system's 24/7 availability and call center for improved accountability and random verification of reported activity and harvest. Commercial fishing operations are not immediately required to adopt electronic reporting under the law. Instead, it provides opportunities for affected parties to participate in its implementation. DNR offers extensive resources, including online training, to assist watermen in understanding the state's electronic harvest reporting system. Effective reporting enables DNR scientists to analyze fishing patterns for improved management decisions and ensures timely actions by holding department accountable. I do want to also clarify, and you'll probably see it in your testimony, that this is not a mandate to go from paper to electronic. This is an opportunity for the department to diversify, I would say, its reporting requirements for those especially who can do this by ease. And two, I want to say, I think what was most disturbing to me is that the department is making decisions based on a little less than 70% of the information. So 60% of the information is coming in. Based on that information, they are making decisions for the department that they may not need to make, but are making, because if they had more information, some of the decisions that they make, they may not need to make. And so with that, I thank the committee for their time and consideration and support of HB 512, and I'll turn it over to DNR. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Great. Thank you so much. Good afternoon, Chair Corman, Vice Chair Boyce, and members of the committee. For the record, I'm Kristen Fiddler, Assistant Secretary for Aquatic Resources at DNR. And I'm joined by Sarah Widman, Associate Director of our Fisheries and Boating Services Division. I'd like to thank Vice Chair Boyce for introducing House Bill 512. We are here today in strong support of this important legislation. Recognizing that you have our written testimony and the fiscal and policy note in front of you, rather than reiterating all of that, I'd like to just emphasize three main points about this bill. So first, as Vice Chair Boyce mentioned, this is enabling legislation. Currently, the department does not have the authority to establish electronic reporting requirements for our fisheries. By giving us the authority to do so, the department would ultimately seek to promulgate regulations through the extensive process of scoping, public comment and review, public meetings, and iterative discussions with stakeholders and partners. So with this bill, we are not seeking to flip a switch and automatically and exclusively require electronic reporting overnight. Really, it's our goal to be able to offer electronic reporting, really modernizing our management tools and making this an available option. Second, in the absence of statutory authority to implement electronic reporting requirements, the department has successfully piloted this tool over the past 11 plus years with the voluntary participation of watermen. For example, from January to December of 2023, there were a total of 35,442 trips reported in our electronic fax system. So with this extensive experience to build on and through lessons learned, we have a refined understanding of how the system can and should work and how it can do so most efficiently. But we also have a greater appreciation for just how useful this information is that's gathered. Pardon me, I'm happy to wrap up. The third part is that, truly, this is critically important legislation for the department. We seek to protect and promote our natural resources in a way that maximizes benefit for all. The collection of robust real-time data is imperative to delivering on that mission. Thank you, and happy to take any questions.
Professor, you're just there for questions?
I'm just here for questions, yes, Chair.
Okay. Any questions for this panel? I do not see any. So thank you. We do have favorable virtual testimony from Robert Brown, Maryland Watermen's Association. Yeah, we can jump to the unfavorable virtual testimony. James Mullen from the Maryland Oystermen's Association. Okay, neither of them are responding. Okay, how about Timothy Mortis from MWA? Yep. Mr. Brown, if you're ready, please go ahead. Oh. He dropped off. Okay.
There's someone up now.
Mr. Mullen, if you're ready, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I'm Jim Mullen. I'm with the Maryland Oystermen's Association about House Bill 512. I had registered in opposition to the bill. Typically, I was a little surprised that this came through in accordance for the secretary to be able to adopt regulations. Typically, standard operating procedure is if there are regulations that are going to be proposed, a scoping exercise begins with all of the interested parties. It goes to the various commissions that fall under the house of the Department of Natural Resources, like Tidal Fish, Advisory, and several others. And there's a robust discussion about the proposed regulations. They're advertised on the DNR website for input, and then it works through this exercise, and it's all inclusive. And I just don't know why a law is needed to adopt certain regulations, which we don't know about. Typically, there's transparency involved, and that is shared with members of the seafood industry. So that's why I signed up in opposition, just because we don't know what these regulations are, and we're not following normal operating procedures through the department with regard to the scoping and the stakeholders that would be affected in various parties. Again, I don't know why a law is needed for this type of regulation, where previously, when we did scoping and stakeholder input, we didn't need a law. So that's why we signed up in opposition, just because honestly, we just don't know why a law is needed when typically in the past for scoping, there was no law. So that's why we signed up in opposition.
Great, thank you. I think we also have Mr. Mortis signed up in opposition. Mr. Mortis, please go ahead.
Hello, everyone. My name is Timothy Mortis. I'm second vice president, Maryland Watermen's Association, president of the Hartford Cecil County Watermen's Association, and I own a seafood carry-out and wholesale business in Hartford County. As Mr. Mullins, pointed to, there's, a couple of strange things about this. This really didn't seem like a departmental bill. There was, we've never needed a law before to scope anything. I'm a member of several of the advisory groups at Natural Resources. None of this was discussed there in any of the groups. As far as reporting, whether it's harvesting, wholesaling, anything like that, I really don't understand why we need any more reporting.
It's not more.
Or why there's a need to even look into any more. I really don't see how much more forthcoming with what we do we need to be. We fill out, if I'm fishing one day, I fill out my catch reports. If I happen to wholesale something out of the restaurant, I fill out my dealer reports. What more is needed? And that's why we're in opposition to this. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions?
Yes.
Okay, well, why don't we bring up Mr. Brown now then?
Mr. Chair, can I clarify a point?
Sorry, Madam Vice Chair, I apologize, but we don't sort of go back through panels. And of course, you'll have many opportunities in subcommittee to sort it out. Is Mr. Brown available?
Hello.
Mr. Brown, please go ahead. Sorry for the trouble.
All right, I don't know what's been said before. Chair and members of this committee, I'd like to have unfavorable on this. The Department of Natural Resources didn't scope this prior to having this fill up, so we could have seen exactly more details of what was happening on it. I haven't heard anything that's been said here so far. A number of our watermen are elderly people in need of form to fill out so that they can get their reports in. We realize that these reports are very important to the industry so that we can make good, sound decisions. But without no more information than what we have on it, I have to be opposed to this at this time. It should have been scoped out. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Any questions? Okay, that concludes the bill hearing on HB 512, but obviously there'll be a lot of opportunity for discussion in subcommittee. We'll now turn to HB 534, Delegate Ruff, Community Development Administration, Live Near Your School Program, Funding and Extension. Welcome to the Environment and Transportation Committee, Delegate.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Madam Vice Chair, and to the rest of the committee. Thank you for permitting me to bring this important bill, which I've cross-filed with Senator Hayes and his Senate Bill 90. This is House Bill 534. And for the record, my name is Delegate Malcolm Ruff, representing the 41st Legislative District in Baltimore City. House Bill 534 aims to continue investing in the lives of Maryland students by making some updates to the Live Near Your School bill, which is set to sunset in September. It's sunset in September of 2020 of this year. It will sunset. And so it's modeled after the Live Near Your Work program. focuses on supporting college students and low-income families in establishing stability. It does two specific things. Of course, like I mentioned, it extends the sunset date to 2030. It would also allow students and recent graduates to continue benefiting from the low interest loans facilitated by the Community Development Authority for home purchases near their public higher education institutions. The bill has a $200,000 appropriation. I would also note that it has passed unanimously through the Senate on second reader with amendments, which I would be amenable to those amendments. And the nature of those amendments in the Senate were to remove the mandate on the appropriation and simply to authorize the governor to appropriate these funds for this program up until 2030. I would also note that by addressing the issue of unaffordable housing, this bill plays a critical role in retaining Maryland students within the state because many students, as you know, at our prestigious higher education institutes, after they graduate, they move away from the state. This bill has support from the University of Maryland system, as you'll note in your bill file, also Coppin State, the City of Baltimore administration, and Baltimore County. So with that, I would urge a favorable report and we'll welcome any questions.
Like a rough, I don't know what you did, but there are a lot of questions up here. Well, welcome to the Environment and Transportation Committee.
Well, I'm glad I was brief then.
Are there any actual questions on House Bill 534? Delegate Guyton.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for bringing this bill, Delegate Rupp. Welcome to ENT. We're very fun. I just wondered, I think this is a great program. And I remember when it was initially suggested, because we're dealing with a sunset, I was just wondering if you could share with the group, if you have available, how well, or if you feel like this program has worked well and sort of what data you have to support continuing it.
I would have to do a little bit more digging. I think that there has been some note in the fiscal note, some notations in the fiscal note that talk about the lack of actually administering the low rate loans that are associated with the assistance for the grants for down payments. So I could definitely follow up and figure out how effective it's been, but I think it's really about establishing this and getting some marketing out there for students to take advantage of this program, which would, I think, help it flourish a bit more.
Okay, thank you so much. And I love the concept behind it, but it would be nice to see a little bit of data to make sure that the policies we're putting in place are actually being utilized. And they probably are, but so and can I ask one more question while I've got them? So you say that you would be happy with the Senate amendment, which just authorizes rather than mandates the appropriation. I guess I'm just going to ask you, are you sure about that?
I'm positive. I'm fine with the amendment if necessary.
Thank you very much.
Any further questions? Great, that concludes the bill hearing on HB 534. We'll now turn to HB 564, Delegate Taveras, real property, residential leases, renters insurance requirements.
Hello.
The hot seat. Okay. So, happy Friday, everyone. Thank you, Chairman Corman and esteemed committee members. It is an honor to be before you here once again. I'm here to ask for your favorable report of HB 564 requiring renters insurance. HB 564 protects tenants by requiring all renters to show proof of renter's insurance when signing a lease and at lease renewal. They can self-select the adequacy of their insurance coverage to ensure it is financially feasible for them. The bill has been amended, and you should have received the amendments to address the concerns of various stakeholders like the Apartment and Office Building Association, realtors, and the like. Removing language that requires landlords to purchase insurance on behalf of the tenant, and that includes the AG's office. We are waiting to hear possible amendments from tenant advocates like the Baltimore City Housing Authority and some other the Public Justice organization regarding how to best address the needs of lower income households. Renters insurance is a vital safety net that covers belongings and property inside living units, as well as additional living expenses arising from incidents such as fires, explosions, floods, theft, or other disasters. Despite the proven benefits of such insurance, there is a significant gap in coverage among renters in Maryland. This bill aims to bridge that gap, providing protection and peace of mind to countless tenants who otherwise might face financial ruin in the wake of an unforeseen event. With an average annual cost of $147, about $12 per month, in Maryland, renters insurance is both affordable and essential for financial security. I've helped hundreds of families that would otherwise be displaced due to unforeseen disasters. Many of these tenants were subletting rooms and were left homeless because the landlord and property owner refused to provide financial assistance. In all of these cases, we were forced to call the Red Cross, Health and Human Services, and I was forced to call favors from friendly landlords and hotel owners to house these vulnerable families. These families were given at most $200, either from the Red Cross or the landlord. For families starting over, that amount of money doesn't take them very far. It's even worse if the tenant owes money to the landlord. In closing, this bill protects tenants' possessions due to an unforeseen incident, alleviating the burden from landlords in these tenuous situations, avoiding legal disputes that often arise from property damage in rental units. Thus, I ask this committee for your favorable report on HB 564, and I am open to questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Delegate Naraki.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Delegate. I just, one question. The part where we're requiring the property owner to carry the insurance for someone if they're not able to purchase insurance for them?
No, that's been amended out as.
That has been amended out?
Yeah, let's go if.
Sure, yeah, I'd be happy.
Mind if we go over the.
Absolutely, yes, that's my question's about, so I would be happy to hear that.
So if we look at the bill as it stands right now, on page 1, striking the beginning with landlord in line 5 through circumstances in line 6, and substitute that a tenant or prospective tenant to provide proof of certain renter's insurance policy to the landlord before signing a lease. So that's really, the crux is put on the tenant to acquire, so that they could really look on their own and put a price point, their own price point on what they choose, the type of coverage that they can afford.
Okay.
That's the first thing. And on amendment 2, on page 4, striking with the beginning of with 1 in line 25, all through 34, all that language has been taken out and has been substituted with before signing a lease, a tenant or prospective tenant shall provide to the landlord proof that the tenant or prospective tenant has acquired a renter insurance policy described under subsection C4 of this section. And we're also in conversations with the Joint Insurance Alliance to ensure that all renters, regardless of how insurable they are covered. I mean, Joint Insurance, they've covered convicted arsonists.
Okay. Thank you, Delegate. That answers my question.
Delegate Terrassa.
Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate where you're headed with this bill in terms of protecting the tenants, but the way I read some of this requires the tenant to have insurance to cover the landlord. Am I misreading that?
Say that again.
It requires the tenant to have insurance to cover the landlord.
No,
Because
this is for their personal property. Right now, the owner, the landlord has to have their own renters, their own landlord insurance, which is like equivalent to an HO6 policy. So right now, should a fire occur, should a fire, flood, whatever, the owner is responsible to have their own insurance to cover for the infrastructure. So the money that comes in from that is supposed to help restore the unit to how it was prior to the incident. However, it cannot that money is not really for the tenant to replace their lost belongings or to house them in a hotel or to buy them food in the interim until they can get back on their feet. And the ALE from a renter's insurance provides that. And that's the concern I have. The single mom with 3 kids, the grandparent, the mixed family that's been left. I've seen households 17 to a house. You know, I've seen whole buildings. I don't know if y'all remember Tom Hooker's building on Flower that exploded. You know, we helped find housing for those individuals.
okay, and so I'm glad to hear that, but I guess what I'm reading on page 3, line, 27 through 31.
I'm sorry, let me look at the bill here.
Sure.
Page 3.
Page 3, line 27 says requires the tenant to maintain a renter's insurance policy that includes is this part being taken out? Is that not what someone just said?
No, that's exempts, that it cannot.
Oh, I see. I'm misreading that. Okay.
No, this is something that cannot happen.
Great. Thank you. I was misreading. Thank you.
I'm very, it's been, not to say that it hasn't been been taken out.
Delegate Foley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Now I am really confused because I was going to ask about lines 27 through 33 on page 3.
3?
Yes, that says it requires the tenant to maintain a renter's insurance policy, which means that. 1, from a particular insurance or list of insurers. 2, includes the landlord as a beneficiary, which was the part Delegate Terrazzo was talking about, an insured party or an additional insured. And 3, that meets any other requirements set by the landlord. So is that, how is that, doesn't that require the tenant to have a policy that includes certain things?
No, those are the things that we're prohibiting to happen. There's been a movement for a lot of owners to add themselves to the insurance policy, and we are fighting against that. So this is basically the things that are not being allowed to happen. So if you look at
that's not what it's
a landlord on page, if you look at page 2, line 27, a landlord may not use a lease or form of lease containing any provision that, and there's 1 through 11, and I include, and 11 falls under that. So these are all the things that a landlord may not do.
Oh, I see. I got it. Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Delegate Long.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. Delegate, thank you for being here today. I wanted to just see if you have reviewed the Attorney General's testimony, if you wanted to provide a response to that. I know that there's a myriad of amendments that have been proposed from different groups, generally some relating to the amendment that you've already proposed as well too.
So,
but just wondering if you want to address the affordability component as well too.
Yes, I do.
Thank you.
So I've spoken to 2 different sections of the AG's office. We've addressed one of them, which is the lines in the back on page 4, 25 to 34, and that, like I said, was amended out, and that was one of the AG's concerns, that somebody can't take out a policy under your name, you know, so that's been addressed. However, this on the affordability piece, that's shared by multiple people, Baltimore City, public justice, and the consumer division. So what I'm asking them is to propose the language to exempt individuals that are in housing authorities that are funded by HUD and the individuals that are in the choice housing voucher program. So those two, because those are individuals that are living really on the edge on the 30% AMI on fixed income. So we're trying to see how we can address those concerns, because even they're saying that even $10 or $12 a month may seem a little much for these households.
Great, thank you. And just lastly, if you could just let the committee know at your discretion, just what amendments after you review the additional amendments that you are amenable to as well.
I'm open, honey. I could talk to anybody.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And I forwarded the amendments, the current amendments as it stands to the committee for your review.
Delegate Kiten.
Mr. Chair, and thank you for bringing the bill. I really appreciate the intent of this legislation. My question for you is, do any other states require that tenants have to have renter's insurance in order to basically have rental housing?
I can't speak to that. I'll be honest. There may be something in my research that speaks to that. I can respond to you after I've reviewed everything. But what I can tell you though is that for me, I've just been in the situation for far too often to be comfortable sleeping at night in the situations where I've seen these households basically become homeless. And I felt driven to put this bill in.
Okay, thank you so much. And I appreciate your heartfelt concern.
Delegate Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Delegate, for being here today. I have one question. Have you addressed whether not having this renter's insurance is grounds for eviction?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And I would like to say that I don't believe it should be. I know that there is a lot of almost all leases, or a good portion of the leases, do include the request that the renter must maintain renter's insurance. Oftentimes what happens is that the tenant does not get it. And it is a breach of contract, but there is no process to verify. And in this bill, it requires a verification process, right? But I don't believe in my heart of hearts that this should be a basis for eviction.
Thank you.
And if there's, and that's something that I'm also considering adding in to make sure that this is something that we can exempt out.
Delegate Ruth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for bringing this bill. I appreciate the intent. I do also have concerns, as others have expressed, and as some of the testimony expressed, about the affordability. $30 a year may not seem like enough, but as was mentioned in some of the testimony, for some people it is. And I appreciate you said you're looking at possible amendments to exempt people who are in housing vouchers, and I forget what the other one you said was.
Housing and housing authorities.
Housing authorities. But are you familiar with the Alice report, the United Way Alice report? It's asset limited. I'm trying to think of what it stands for, but it's basically people who are working. They don't fall in the poverty level, but they have trouble affording their basic needs. And so I guess so there's a lot more people than are in those programs who may have trouble affording this. It's a difficult issue, but I'm just curious if you would consider broadening, or how you might consider broadening that protection.
Yeah,
that exemption.
The like I said, these policies, it's $147 a year, which is $12 a month, not 30. And to me, that's one trip to Starbucks in a month. That might be 2 beers. And if somebody said, well, what if I buy a Corona and I drink it at home? It's $1. That means you bought a 24-36 case.
Thank you, and I appreciate that.
You know what I mean? So and I'm just saying, I'm willing to have that conversation because I'm always open to it. But I also think that we're also not thinking of what could happen and the protection and what happens to those individuals when they're placed in those situations where there's a flash flood and everybody in a lot of people in my district live in basements. There was a flash flood where everybody in a whole street was put out and they almost lost their lives.
I appreciate that, and it's definitely a problem, and I understand that. Some of the testimony indicates it might be more than the $12 a month you indicate, and for somebody who's making a choice between their medication and feeding their child, that even $12 a month could be a lot. So,
Okay.
Well, I mean, I'm looking at a hardship.
I don't want to get into a
Delegate
discussion.
Tavares, thank you. Thank you very much. We have a long panel of favorable amendment testimony, so we'll get to keep hashing this out. So I do not see any further questions for the sponsor. So let's move to that favorable amendment in-person group. We have, it looks like 5 witnesses. So you might need to rotate seats a little bit. William Castelli on behalf of the Realtors, Albert Turner, Renters United Maryland, Ryan Washington, AOBA, Grayson Wiggins, MMHA, and Zafar Shah, Maryland Legal Aid.
I don't know you, but hello. Hold on, let me get out of here. Thank you, gentlemen.
Please, someone go ahead when you're ready.
And for the record, if I can, Mr. Shah, he is over in the Senate side for a hearing. He might not show up, just to let everyone know. Good afternoon, Chairman, Vice Chair. My name is Albert Turner. I am a staff attorney with the Public Justice Center and a member of Renters United Maryland. We thank the delegate for this bill. We believe the intent of the bill is in the right place. However, we do have concerns. We have submitted written testimony on behalf of those concerns. Some of those concerns that have been raised in this hearing, particularly the affordability of this bill, particularly if you are dealing with a voucher holder or someone else who is living on very limited means. $10, $20 could be a real tightening on the wallet for an individual. The second portion that we have concerns on, is the requirement that the tenant need to have the insurance, because we do, as a delegate to my right stated, we do fear that this could lead to triggering a breach of lease case. Or at the very least, it can muddy the waters for a breach of lease, where a lease doesn't actually require the tenant to have insurance, but there is this law out here that says that the tenant needs to have insurance, and we are fearful that that could trigger some type of issue in the courts. And so we are very appreciative of the delegate for this amendment, for this bill, We do have amendment issues, and we do look forward to speaking with the delegate more on trying to legislate more amendments and getting this bill to the place that we want it to be. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee. My name is Ryan Washington with the Apartment Office Building Association. And I'd just like to first thank the bill sponsor for working with us and taking our amendments and just being terrific to work with. As the conversation goes on, there is a lot more work we need on this bill. Just as current industry practice, many of our members do require on the lease that tenants have renters insurance. I never quoted from instances or they haven't shared instances where that was an issue of breach of lease. However, they have brought up the issues of tenants getting into a agreement or a policy and then letting the policy cancel or canceling it. And that may be due to affordability or other issues. And that may be hard for the housing provider in terms of trying to ensure that they maintain their policy. So we look forward to working with this bill sponsor in the committee just to ensure that tenants are properly insured and there are no additional costs that are impacting our members. Thank you. I'll stay for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, Bill Castelli on behalf of Maryland Realtors. And we also agree with the spirit and intent of the bill. The two concerns that the realtors have, one has been addressed by one of the amendments by the delegate in terms of taking out the responsibility of the landlord to actually pick the insurance for that tenant. The second concern that we have is where a landlord or an owner of a property may be an additional insured. That is purely for liability coverage, and it is generally free to the tenant. In fact, it's always free to the tenant to add the additional, but it's not, doesn't cover the landlord's not a beneficiary of the policy. They are just literally covered in instances where it is the tenant liability and it's just for the defense of the landlord to step out of the suit. If the landlord is in fact, negligent, guilty, his insurance or her insurance would then kick in and it wouldn't be the tenant's insurance. But that's why we would suggest that that additional insured stay on as well.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Grayson Wiggins here on behalf of the Maryland Multi-Housing Association. You have our written testimony. The bill raises a lot of questions. I think a lot of them have been covered here today, but we'd be happy to work on it if the committee decides to go that way. Thank you.
Thank you all. First question is Delegate Stewart.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good to see you all. So I'm really glad that the sponsor took out the provision making the landlord force purchase the insurance. I think that was not going to work very well. I'm not so sure that Maryland should become what appears to be the first state in the country to require renters insurance. I kind of agree a little bit with the Public Justice Center about the cost. I am intrigued by this additional insured issue and the prohibitions on sort of some of these prohibitions that the bill has about what you can put in a lease. And this is not an issue that I was really honestly super fluent with, but I'm reading from Progressive's website. Progressive offers renters insurance. It says, your landlord should never be listed on your renter's insurance policy as an additional insured. Having an additional insured on your renter's insurance means that you would be paying to cover them and their personal property too. Renter's insurance is designed to cover you, not your landlord, and they should have their own insurance policy in place. Now, I know obviously the landlord's going to have their insurance policy in place either way, but help me understand this. And Bill, I know you put this in your testimony, especially. Help me understand what's going on. Why is this important why do you disagree with Progressive?
So what I would say is it depends on what your additional insurance includes. And we are certainly not saying that the renter's insurance policy should include a policy for, the landlord's property, personal property.
Right.
But typically in our situation, I'll give you the best example I can give you is like, say, a single family home. That's mostly what our folks represent. Tenant moves into single family home. There's no trampoline in the backyard. Tenant then sets up a trampoline. Neighbor kid Billy comes over, plays on the trampoline, breaks arm, parents sue, tenant, parents sue, landlord. Landlord's not at fault. There's no liability landlord has for, a trampoline they never knew about. So that policy would then protect the landlord in the defense of that suit because they're being sued as well. And so absent, let's say that wasn't the fact, they were not an additional insured on that policy, then landlord's policy would kick in. And what would landlord's policy do? Their insurance company and their lawyers would then, along with neighbor saying tenant's at fault, their insurance attorneys would also be going against the tenant and saying tenant's at fault too. So I think it's keeping the risk closest to what is the cause of the risk and having that risk insured by that insurance policy, rather than now two basic insurance policies focus on, the tenant. So I think that's from our perspective, and whatever that language needs to be to make it clear what that policy covers, that's what our view would be.
And just to add on to that, there are certain insurance policies. I'm not an expert, but just doing some research. Some insurance policies do allow a housing provider, especially for more larger multifamily communities, to be an interested party. So in cases where, a tenant may their policy may lapse or cancel, it actually provides a landlord notification in order to, keep track of who is insured and who's not. So those also
Yeah.
another thing to look
Yeah, and it
into.
looks like Progressive actually recommends that you do list the landlord as your interested party,
Yeah.
but not your additional insured. So anyway, I got some reading to do too. This is a little bit over my head, but I appreciate it.
Delegate Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Washington, you mentioned briefly industry practices. So is it an industry practice and for you to let people know that perhaps rental insurance is needed or recommended when they sign a lease?
Yeah, and that's already included in the lease. And you know, some communities may even offer, may have a partnership with renters insurance companies where they could just, you know, allow a renter just at the time of leasing sign up for that program.
And that's industry practice.
Yes.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Okay, I do not see any, so thank you all very much. That concludes the bill here on HB 564. Let's bring up Delegate Grossman. HB 577, Department of Housing and Community Development, Homeless Shelter Licensing Program Establishments. Delegate Grossman, you ready?
Out of testimony, I'll just start with 3 and then.
Great.
Yeah, okay.
Thanks for your patience.
And for the sake of the committee, because I'm sure there'll be questions later, Delegate Grossman doesn't hear very well. So this is the one time she'll ask you to yell at her when you're asking questions across the room, just so I make sure I get what you're saying. Thank you. You ready? All right. Mr. Chair, Madam Vice Chair, and members of the very busy Environment and Transportation Committee. For the record, I'm Delegate Grossman, and I'm here to testify on behalf of HB 577. HB 577 will create 5 pins within the Department of Housing and Community Development to establish a homeless shelter licensing division. In 2023, 635,000 homeless individuals were identified during the point in time count conducted across the country. This represents a 12% increase from 2022 in homelessness and the largest increase across the country since 2007. 32,000 of those were Marylanders experiencing homelessness. Currently, less than half of the nearly 200 shelters that operate in the state of Maryland receive funding that establish basic standards for their level of care. HB 577 would ensure that all shelters operating in Maryland are well equipped and in compliance with minimal standards to ensure safety and well-being of residents, volunteers, and staff. The primary component of this bill creates a new division within DHCD that would provide uniformity for basic standards related to health and safety, fire occupancy, admissions, discharge policy, and other aspects to ensure shelter success. These standards would provide a minimum requirement be satisfied to ensure shelter residents, regardless of geographic location, receive equitable treatment. DCHD will work in consultation with current service providers to ensure that these standards are reasonable, achievable, and incorporate feedback of the shelter provider network. The shelters across our state are doing much needed work, providing food, shelter, job assistance, and other resources to our most vulnerable citizens. I believe that this bill would bolster their efforts to provide accommodations for homeless individuals and further our shared goal of ending homelessness. As a person who's experienced homelessness, I can tell you that the impact of HB 577 will be profound. We have the opportunity to innovate our homeless services in Maryland and ensure that shelters are treated like the basic human right they are, not a privilege to be earned. The passage of HB 577 will send a clear message to some of Maryland's most vulnerable residents who often feel invisible, that we see them, that we care about them, and most importantly, that we respect them. And with that, I'll ask for a favorable report on HB 577, and I'll turn it over to my panel. So start with.
Hello, good afternoon, members of the committee. I hope you'll forgive me. I have a bit of a hoarse voice this afternoon, so I'll try to speak up. As Delegate Grossman mentioned, there's over 32,000 Marylanders experiencing homelessness each year. These are some of our most vulnerable neighbors and citizens. They have experienced the trauma of losing their home, their belongings, their employment usually, as well as sometimes even their family and support networks in the process. Shelters are serving some of the most vulnerable groups in our society, and they have complex needs. That includes folks who are fleeing domestic violence. About 8% of folks experiencing homelessness are doing that. Children under 18 comprise 20% of the people who are experiencing homelessness. So our shelters need to be equipped to serve children. 26% are older adults over the age of 55 who might have complex needs around mobility, services that are, culturally competent and age competent, and chronically homeless individuals who have disabilities comprise 18% of everyone experiencing homelessness. We believe no one should experience homelessness at all. We need to provide shelter for everyone. It's critical that we ensure all households impacted by homelessness are able to access shelter programs that are safe, inclusive, and trauma-informed to ensure that lives are protected and we do no further harm. What we mean by safe, shelters need to be in buildings that don't present health, life, and safety hazards. They need to meet standards that are associated with federal, state, and local laws and need to provide dignified accommodations. By inclusive, we mean that shelter must be provided equitably to all individuals, not discriminate or exclude populations based on the composition of the family, race, gender, sexual orientation, their faith, or other protected statuses. It must also provide services that are low barrier rather than require preconditions to receive shelter that is essential to protecting their life. They need to be trauma-informed and be equipped with the training, the tools, and the resources to respond with compassion, cultural sensitivity, and population-specific services. DHCD receives outreach every day from individuals who have harmful experiences in shelter and have been denied entry because of these different issues. This bill would create a consistent set of program standards for all shelters to follow and help correct these wrongs. We do intend to engage community partners throughout the process of drafting regulations. That includes our COCs, our shelters, county governments in particular, who are a key player in ending homelessness, and provide opportunities for people with lived experience to take leadership on this issue and share the experiences that they've had. Through this process, we would create a tiered system of licensing that takes into effect the different types of shelter. There's a wide variety of them and has nuance. We also would provide training and technical assistance to shelters on the new regulations and prepare them to come into compliance.
Okay, thank you. Your time is well past. Can you just identify yourself for us?
Sure. Danielle Meister, I'm the Assistant Secretary for the Division of Homeless Solutions.
Thank you so much.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Izzy Scheikoff. I'm the Director of Housing Services with the Maryland Department of Aging. I'm in a position that didn't exist until recently, a couple of months ago. The reason we have a position in the department is because our secretary and indeed the governor have identified housing as a real priority, affordable housing as a real priority. One of the functions of the department is to work very closely with our local area agencies on aging in our conversations with the leadership of the county agency directors. The number one issue that they have pointed to consistently is a lack of affordable housing and housing with supportive services for seniors. Seniors are increasingly found homeless in this state. We all know the state is one of the most unaffordable states to live in, that eviction rates are not we should be not proud of. And we believe that this bill will increase the increase support for and increase the services provided through homeless shelters. If you take out homeless families, 37% of those who are homeless in the state of Maryland are over the age of 55. So we have a lot of homeless older Marylanders, and we would like to make sure that the shelters that are offering services are properly accessible and set up to support their clients appropriately. The governor recently signed an executive order calling on the Department of Aging to create a longevity ready Maryland initiative with the goal for all Marylanders to live lives that are healthy, financially secure, and improve access to affordable housing and healthcare. We think that this bill is very much aligned with that initiative, and so we ask for your favorable support on HB 577.
Greetings, Chair Corman, Vice Chair Boyce, and the esteemed members of the committee. For the record, my name is Lee Blinder. I use they, them pronouns, and I am the Executive Director of Trans Maryland, I am also the chair of the Maryland Commission on LGBTQI+ Affairs. I offer my testimony today in my capacity with Trans Maryland. We are a multiracial, multigender community power building organization for Maryland's trans community. We represent thousands of transgender Marylanders who have detailed to us the barriers that they face in accessing both affirming housing as well as those in need of emergency shelter. The overwhelming majority have no affirming options to turn to in 23 counties in Maryland, and the programs in Baltimore City are at capacity. The U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development published a report titled Equal Access for Transgender People, Supporting Inclusive Housing and Shelters. And this report details really disturbing gaps in access for transgender people and states nearly 30% of homeless transgender individuals report being turned away from a shelter due to their transgender status. And 22% report experiencing sexual assault perpetrated by staff or other shelter residents. In the past year, Trans Maryland has seen a sharp rise in new Marylanders who are seeking our services. Marylanders who are fleeing the now 22 states that have banned at least some forms of life-saving, gender-affirming care. Our already strained systems that often fail the trans community will continue to be inundated with new residents that they are not equipped to serve or to provide basic safety to under their roof. It is time for the law to be crystal clear for transgender Marylanders and ensure that Maryland shelters offer a safe space for us. For these reasons, we urge a favorable report on HB 577. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate Grossman. I see there's one other in-person favorable, Jeff Garrett. Do you want to bring Jeff up before we do questions?
Hi, my name is Jeff Garrett. I am the chair of the Continuum of Care of Baltimore. I'm also a person with lived experience, having experienced homelessness up to as recently as October of last year. I was living in a tent in Baltimore City. I have experienced our shelters firsthand in multiple different places in Baltimore City. I have seen the conditions that our people live through on a daily basis and have been for years. The pandemic only exacerbated the issues. When the one shelter that Maryland was using, Baltimore City was using, which was a condemned building to begin with, which should never have been used to start, was then transferred to a different facility to accommodate the COVID issue. Those gentlemen lived for 2 years in that facility with no hot running water. Okay. I lived last winter staying in winter emergency shelter in Baltimore City, and showers were provided, but no towels, no washcloths, no soap. These are the conditions. These are just basics, living conditions. We're not talking about all the other things that go on within these facilities, the lice, the bed bugs, the disease. It's just not right. And if every other industry in Baltimore, in Maryland, has to be regulated and managed, this should be as well. I mean, it's a commentary on all of us to this date that this industry is not regulated. And my one thing I want to say to all of you in this room is the punishment. I mean, I'm worried about the effects of what will happen with these fines and coming down on these facilities too hard, that we no longer then have these facilities to take care of the individuals that are there. So it's a double-edged sword that I'm really concerned about, but I also believe the regulation needs to be there at the end of the day, no matter what.
Thank you, sir. Thanks for sharing your personal experience. Delegate Grossman, you want to come back into the hot seat? I'm new here, but I think all the lights suggest to me this might be your first time in the Environment and Transportation Committee? No? There's a little bit of a dispute going on among your colleagues. Have you been in this committee before, Delegate Grossman? Have you been in the committee before?
Have I been in? No, this is my first time. So is everybody's lights on for that reason?
There are some actual questions, though. We'll start with Delegate
I
Long.
thought we were about to have a really lively conversation.
We still might be. This is ENT. Delegate Long?
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. Delegate Grossman, thank you for being here. I want to first just, it's going to go to a question, but thank you for bringing this bill. And I do believe that there should be some guidelines, framework, oversight in this particular industry, in this realm. But I am concerned for, number one, the religious community, for those churches that operate a program called Safe Nights. And so in the wintertime, especially in Southern Maryland, during Safe Nights, they'll take individuals off the streets and they'll stay and they'll rotate to different churches throughout the entire period of the winter. So they'll spend 1 week in one church, 1 week in another church. And so would this legislation, if it is enacted, passed, would that prevent those churches? And I think it is a double-edged sword, because on one hand, we're saying that there's a lack of homeless shelters. There's a lack of shelters for women who are going through domestic violence, their children, for those in the LGBTQ plus community, et cetera, right? There's a lack. But on the other hand, if we have to put too strict of guidelines, and again, I do concede that there should be some oversight, but it's going to prevent others from even getting in this realm. So I'm not sure if you can, or somebody on the panel can express how Safe Nights be affected, religious community, and not infringing on their particular their beliefs and views. So thank you.
So I'll take a swing, and then if I miss anything, Danielle can fill it in. So I think first and foremost, right, I shared I'm a person with lived experience in homelessness. I also work in this space every day. So certainly I would not support anything that was going to reduce the number of shelter beds that were available across our state. When it comes to your Safe Nights, Delegate, if they are Safe Night shelters that were that are tied to your local emergency management plan, which generally they are, each community is required to have a plan like that. Municipalities, et cetera, that would say it is below 30 degrees and therefore Safe Nights are triggered tonight. There's language in here that excludes them from this licensing process, right? The other thing I think that's really important to recognize with this bill, and I think where some of the heartburn has come from it is that this is just creating a department to work within the homeless setting to create regulations. The bill does not create those regulations where you're talking about that become restrictive or could potentially become restrictive. And it says shall create regulations within certain areas, but it does not identify what specifically those regulations are, how they would impact the shelter environment as a whole, not just faith-based shelters, but any shelter. And I think that we have heard very loud and clear from the department that there is a strong commitment from them to work with all shelters across the state to create regulations, potentially even end up in a tiered system or different things like that, that don't shutter shelter, but strengthen them.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Mr. Chair, if I can just, thank you so much. But I think when you see the $10,000 fine listed, whether or not we're aiming to be restrictive, that automatically seems to just jump off and say, scream restrictive to me. That's my concern. Especially because this is something that we have not particularly delved into too deeply here. I think that we should be open to gradually working there as we're providing some framework.
And so I think, again, the $10,000 fine is for lack of compliance with licensure or for falsification of documentation for not working with the regulatory division. So the only time you would get to that place, again, I'll let you speak if I'm saying anything out of line, would be should the department, again, work with everyone to create regulations with feedback from the environment, the shelter providers across the state, both faith-based and non-faith-based, create a system that everyone comes into agreement works, and then you refuse to comply with that. That's where you may find yourself exposed to that $10,000 fine. But there's a pretty long runway before you're going to get to that place.
Thank you. And my last comment towards, I just think that there needs to be clear language in referencing the Safe Night programs, and not just with respect to wintertime, but they generally operate throughout the course of the year. And there are several churches who the county governments, especially who don't have the resources or the manpower, the shelters to accommodate the homeless populations, who lean very heavily on these faith-based communities as a pillar of their faith. When I was hungry, you fed me. When I was naked, you clothed me. So I think that there should be some leeway for these churches. If they have to apply for a temporary license when they're even housing for 1 week, that's great. But there needs to be some kind of some leeway granted to the faith-based community. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Delegate Naraki.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Delegate, my question centers around the Maryland Network Against Domestic Violence, their unfavorable testimony. Had you had a chance to take a look at that? So I'm particularly concerned inside of their testimony. They talk about by identifying these locations, by identifying staff, we could actually be placing victims of domestic violence in greater harm. So can you address that? Because that to me would sort of go against what you're trying to do with this bill if we were to do something like that.
Sure. And so again, because the bill does not create the regulation, only the department to work to create those regulations. I'll let Danielle speak to it a little further, but I would suspect that working within those sensitive populations like domestic violence survivors, there could be opportunity to have photos of locations or things like that sent in versus individuals coming to visit. Although part of their testimony also highlights that they're going through a certification process now that does also bring outside entities in to do that certification. So they're somewhat open to that or working within that space already.
Yeah, I think, protecting the confidentiality and safety of survivors is incredibly important. So we would intentionally design a process that doesn't compromise that. We provide funding to domestic violence agencies throughout the year through the state funding. We have certain protocols in place about not recording addresses and files. There's certain measures we go to already and would probably strengthen those policies. But we're happy to consider any kinds of, accommodations around safety and confidentiality that they would want to have. We could even look at something like empowering a associated organization to do some of those inspections on our behalf, like MNADV. Like that's something we could consider for sure. So there's some protocols we could put in place. We could look at different accommodations, but part of this consultation process is meeting with groups like that to hear their concerns, look at what standards they already have, what processes they already have in place, and accommodate that and create a system that's flexible. When we talk about a tiered system of licensing, we have multiple types of shelters in the state. So we talk about DV shelters, we're talking about interfaith rotating shelters. The idea behind this bill and how we would implement it is to create different categories of shelter licensing that have rules and regulations respective to that type of shelter. So in my mind, it doesn't make sense to regulate a DV shelter or a cold weather shelter the same way we would all shelters. There needs to be customization, nuance for the type of shelter, the population that they're serving. And the draft process for regulation making would do that. We would consult all those parties.
Sure. No, and I certainly appreciate that. But for me, I would personally feel more comfortable with a piece of legislation like this that had some guardrails inside of the legislation saying that. So I certainly appreciate where you're coming from, but I think guardrails are often important in these kinds of situations as well. So thank you.
Delegate Allen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Delegate, thank you for bringing the bill. Very, very important. I have a lot of questions, probably for the favorable with amendment and the unfavorable test, witnesses. But for you, I'm just curious because I'm reading some of the unfavorable testimony now, and I'm referencing that and cross-referencing with the bill itself. Is there anywhere in the bill that mandates that shelters house violent offenders and anyone who poses a threat to?
No, the only mandate is around protected classes that are identified within the bill.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, I do not see any other questions, so we will go to the virtual favorable testimony. We can start with Laura Toner from the Comico Public Library.
Hi, thank you, Mr. Chair, Vice Chair, and committee members. Good afternoon. My name is Laura Toner, and I am a youth services librarian at Wicomico Public Library. The public library is a central pillar of the community and serves as one of the only truly public spaces remaining in our communities. And as such, we work with members of the community from all experiences and backgrounds. One of the key demographics we serve are unhoused patrons, and as such, we see directly into the difficulties faced by the unhoused in our community. There is limited access to shelters for anyone, and the ones we do have access to intentionally build up a multitude of barriers for access to shelter. Unhoused people who are seeking shelter in Wicomico County are regularly turned away for missing deadlines for intake, for suffering from substance use disorders, for their sexual orientation, for their gender identity, for their religious affiliation, and much more. This population is regularly turned away from local shelters, even in instances of extreme weather conditions that are dangerous for those without shelter. Their behaviors are deemed irrelevant, while these characteristics, which are largely based in discriminatory personal beliefs, are the focus. A lack of appropriate resources has been proven to be deadly to our community. This bill will create a foundation for improving the safety and protection of a vulnerable population in our community. Access to shelters should not be determined based on morality and personal values. All people deserve equitable access to their basic rights, which includes shelter.
Thank you. We also have Christy Richardson from the Wacomico Public Library. Please go ahead.
Hi, thank you, Mr. Chairman and Vice Chair and committee members. My name is Christy Richardson, and I work at the Wacomico Public Library in Salisbury as a community support worker. I work largely with the unhoused population, assisting them with job readiness, connecting them to services, and routing them to shelters and housing resources. We know that the current cost of living is seriously impacting all people's ability to afford housing. So I'm seeing an increase of people experiencing evictions. The amount you would have to make monthly is about $5,763 to only spend 30% of your income. So as these evictions are increasing and I'm routing people to shelters, I'm seeing the barriers that they are implementing. And I just wanted to tell you about the people I serve and why they've been denied shelter. So a family that had 3 children was denied shelter because the mother and father were unmarried. The shelter stated that this went against their religious beliefs, and this family chose to go to the courthouse and get married so that they would not be homeless. A trans woman was denied shelter for being unsafe for children because of her gender identity, despite having no record of violence. She was given shelter at a separate organization where she was housed with men, despite identifying as a woman, and her paperwork was circled with both man and woman on it, and then marked out and written in other. And she left and chose to be street homeless due to harassment. 2 unhoused individuals died last month due to the shelter not allowing anyone who had substance abuse disorders to stay. A man who spoke French Creole was told that he could not stay in a shelter because of his language barrier and that it was a safety concern. A man was denied shelter at both of our local shelters because his wheelchair was a liability. An individual who practiced a religion other than Christianity was expected to participate in their religious services, even though that's not how they believe. So I'm just seeking, what do we do as organizations who provide support for the vulnerable when the institutions provided turn away anyone they don't agree with?
Thank you very much. We'll now turn to Amber Green, Phoenix Youth Project, Inc.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Amber Green. I'm the founder of Phoenix Youth Project. We're a homeless youth serving agency that services the entire Tri-County area of Wacomico, Worcester, and Somerset. And at Phoenix Youth Project, we witnessed firsthand the struggles and challenges faced by homeless youth in our community. And among these challenges is the reluctance of some youth to seek shelter in traditional facilities due to the fear of discrimination and judgment and pressing concern. I currently do have 2 young people who frequent our drop-in center who are street homeless, and they will not go into a shelter because they do know and feel that they will be discriminated against. And I did submit a written testimony that does have the voices of those youth as well as our homeless youth services interns who can share their voices in that. But I wanted to bring the light and to address something that I did hear earlier when it was about the fear of opening up shelters and how this program is going to hinder. As a young director, at 33 years old, I was able to open up a new youth shelter for homeless youth in our area in Wacomico County that did not have one. And I would have appreciated the guidelines that would have came from a program such as this. The reason because of that is because due to not having a licensing program, due to insurers or funders or donors not knowing if we were meeting guidelines, if we were meeting expectations. It was really hard to get insurance. It was really hard to get donors. It was really hard to sustain our shelter, to the fact that we don't operate that shelter, not because we weren't following guidelines, but we don't operate that shelter because it was hard to sustain that shelter without guidelines, without the accountability, without being able to say, you know, Phoenix Youth Project is doing the job right. And so because of that, I wanted to stress that I do not think this program is going to hinder the ability to be able to open up shelters. I think it's going to be able to open up a whole new realm of leaders. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, we have Ken Phelps Jr., the Episcopal Diocese of Maryland.
Good afternoon, Chair Corman, Vice Chair Boyce, and the members of the committee. My name is the Reverend Steve Holt. I am testifying today on behalf of the Episcopal Diocese of Maryland in support of HB 577. I'm the priest of the Church of the Guardian Angel in Baltimore City, where we have a very active weekly food pantry. Many of our people also experience housing instability and homelessness, and I'm often making referrals to shelters and other services. I worked with the Homelessness Solutions Program at DHCD for more than 4 years. I'm very aware of the many great programs that the state supports. Unfortunately, I'm also aware that there are still places in Maryland where people experiencing homelessness may face discrimination in admission policies, may be mandated to participate in religious services that are not in accordance with their beliefs, or where the facilities are less than adequate for people to be staying overnight. As an Episcopal priest, my faith called me to ensure that all people are treated with dignity and respect, and that means protecting the rights of people who are experiencing homelessness, protecting their rights to be able to get into shelter unconditionally. The proposed licensing process in this statute would make sure that the people I'm referring to shelters are not going to be denied access to a program because of who they are, and that they will have a dignified and adequate place to stay and sleep. I and the Diocese of Maryland request that this committee give HB 577 a favorable report. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions for the favorable virtual witnesses? Okay, we have a unfavorable virtual witness we'll turn to next, J. Anthony Dickerson, Christian Shelter, Inc.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Anthony Dickerson. I'm the Executive Director of the Christian Shelter in Salisbury, Maryland. And I strongly oppose this bill for 4 reasons. Reasons number one, this bill would threaten the autonomy of shelters, particularly the faith-based shelters that operate based on their faith and the word of God. Also, it's giving shelters the freedom to govern themselves and has allowed them to better serve. We've been serving the community for 45 years and we've done some creative things and we have been successful. Point number two, we have to screen everyone that comes into the shelter because again, currently I have 33 children in this particular shelter, and it's my responsibility not only keep our guests, but I got to keep 33 children safe. Each shelter has its own unique criteria and qualifications to provide personalized care, meets the needs of those seeking refuge. Point number three, if passed, this particular bill will place a heavy burden on shelters operating and administrating costs, making it challenging to serve the vulnerable population, namely the homeless. Shelters already operate on a limited resource. An additional financial strain could impede their ability to provide essential services and support to those who are in need. And point number four, the passing of this bill may impact the donors willing to contribute to the shelters. Donors, they appreciate the accountability that we have placed. They appreciate the strict guidelines shelter impose on their guests for them to become productive members of society. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Seeing no questions, we'll turn to our unfavorable in-person panel. We have Amelia Jackson, Churches for Streets of Hope, Melanie Shapiro, Maryland Network Against Domestic Violence, and Dominic Butchko, Maryland Association of Counties. Butchko, excuse me. Butchko, I got it right? I got to listen to my podcast more carefully. Sorry.
Awesome.
Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Amelia Jackson, and I'm a board member for Churches of Streets of Hope, which is an amazing organization that has been open since 2010, providing cold weather shelter from November to April, along with other services for men experiencing homelessness in Baltimore County. The way this bill is currently written, it causes us great concern, which is why we raise opposition that this could be the death of our organization that has so richly served men in Baltimore County. First thing this legislation calls for is the ability to prepare food. We have generous volunteers and groups that provide delicious homemade meals for our men daily. Our facility is actually not equipped with a kitchen. We have space to keep the food warm at food safe temperatures and refrigeration to keep things cold. So if we were required to add a kitchen to the space that we are, that will be above the budget that we have to be able to actually provide those services. And one of the individuals in our shelter, one reason that the men do come back to see us so often is because this is different than the traditional shelters in the county. Second, our budget is small to that same effect. So giving requirements for specific square footage, secure storage, lactation space, sufficient supplies for infants and toddlers would definitely strain our budget to a point that we may not be able to operate to serve these men who come back to us year after year that can't find housing. Also, we're already beholden to ordinances within our grant funding as well as within our jurisdiction. We use coordinated entry to have individuals to come to our program. We have done fire inspections, building inspections, and have a use of occupancy permit, which is in accordance with our local jurisdiction to operate a shelter. Many shelters that I'm aware of still do that. So our concerns are that we implore you to reconsider this and the strain that it will put on agencies that are already doing the work in this work to house the homeless.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee. Melanie Shapiro, I'm the Public Policy Director with the Maryland Network Against Domestic Violence. Here in opposition, unless amended, to House Bill 577. I'll start by saying that we do think that there should be some sort of oversight. We definitely have concerns about certain programs that could establish themselves, call themselves shelters, domestic violence shelters, and not actually be providing the necessary and quality services. However, I represent the 19 comprehensive domestic violence programs in the state. In Family Law 4515 and then in COMAR 01.04.01.05 are regulations regarding what these programs need to provide. One of the things they need to provide and set them apart from many other domestic violence service providers is emergency housing. Those are the shelters. There's one in each of the counties. And they currently many of them receive VAWA, VOCA, or FIPSA dollars, they're federal grants administered through GOCAP. The confidentiality requirements of those grants are the most stringent I have ever seen. It is we cannot neither confirm nor deny that somebody is present. If law enforcement calls, if anybody calls, you cannot even say that that person is receiving services. So to then open up these confidential locations to an additional body when there's already oversight through the grants, which are administered through GOCAP, to another agency when there's already oversight, they are eligible for these 19 comprehensive programs for additional pot of funding. The state dollars that go to domestic violence are administered through DOMV, also through GOCAP, and go towards these comprehensive programs. We are in the process. There's another bill. The hearing was yesterday to allow the State Domestic Violence Coalition to certify these programs as comprehensive. If that were to pass, it would be easy to say the 19 comprehensive programs that are certified, but right now they're just the 19 comprehensive programs that qualify under statute. But our concerns are really for the victims whose confidentiality for the shelters, for the location, and the fact that there is already oversight. And so this is incredibly duplicative. So for all of those reasons, we are opposing House Bill 577 unless it is amended. Yes.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, Dominic Butchka with the Maryland Association of Counties here in respectful opposition to House Bill 577. I want to be clear on something for a minute. The Maryland Associated Counties, MACO, conceptually, we agree with this bill. That being said, we have several concerns with the execution and the language as drafted. Our biggest concern is that counties are the primary providers of social services. And if we don't go into this carefully and our shelters have to shut down for whatever reason, that was even referenced on the sponsor panel as a concern, it'll be the local jurisdictions who have to serve as the backstop. This is an issue that we need to address. Counties stand ready to be a stakeholder in addressing this issue, but we need to go about it carefully because the stakes are too high. So that being said, while we do remain opposed, we want to be a good stakeholder and we remain at the table willing to work on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate Creighton.
Sharon, I want to thank the sponsor for bringing this bill. And for all three of you, you have very thoughtful comments and concerns. So I appreciate that sensitivity. Full disclosure, I am a co-sponsor of this bill and do support it. But another full disclosure is I've also worked in domestic violence shelters. And so I absolutely agree with your amendment concept. But my question to you, and I heard what your concerns are with the monetary possibilities that you might not be able to fiscally afford the regulations that are put into place. But for the other two of you, do you believe, because both the counties and the domestic violence networks already have oversight in lots of ways of these shelters, are there pieces of what's currently being proposed or what you hear is being proposed that would be a problem other than the confidentiality, which I completely understand? Or are there ways that our counties or domestic violence shelters are not already meeting the minimum requirements that we hear?
Thank you for that question. And I do want to say, we've already had some very productive conversations about how we can address the concerns. And so we are at the table having those conversations already. I think that many of these shelters have been around for 40 plus years. They're not new. So I don't think that any of them would not meet these requirements. I would note that they're all also grant funded and nonprofits. And so the licensing process in and of itself creates it takes staff time. And Delegate Stein had a bill that regarding grants and the issues with all of that documentation. We're taking services away from victims because staff time is being allocated towards these administrative processes. And so it's a duplicative process. So I would say that conceptually, yes, all of the programs are probably meeting and the shelters are meeting all of these requirements. And so that is why we think that the exclusion of the 19 comprehensive domestic violence programs would be the proper approach because they are meeting those high standards that shelters should be complying with. I mean, we're not saying that they should not be doing all of these things, but they already are. And so the administrative burden on them is going to be costly and detract from victim services.
Okay, and is that the argument from the counties as well? Because this isn't trying to, my understanding, it's not trying to capture all of the good shelters, all of you who are doing things well. This is to catch the bad actors, and we know that they are out there. So is the answer the same for the counties then? Would they already be acceptable in your opinion, as far as the oversight of the counties and the requirements that might come up? Or do you think there'll be any issues that you might have to change?
So there are several very, very technical issues. I think the biggest issue that we see with this legislation is not conceptually. It's the rollout and the fact that we have so many questions with it. One of the biggest things is emergency shelters around cooling and heating, and you put those up in emergency circumstances, sometimes within hours. And so the idea that you would have to have, a license for that is just not practical in those situations. And if there was conversations with stakeholders like counties, we could have addressed that very easily. There's also a number of points around continuum of cares or COCs, and some jurisdictions function as those, some jurisdictions don't, but there's federal requirements in there. This overlaps with those. There are also a number of things that, if they were to be addressed in regulations, are already being addressed by county law. And so, again, there's just a number of very technical points where this is the right path, but it needs to be cleaned up quite a bit.
Great, thank you so much.
Delegate Lehman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Delegate Grossman, thank you so much for bringing this bill. I think it's really important. It is a little hard to believe that there is no standard. There's no statewide standard, I think, for these shelters. My question is to the woman, I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name, that spoke about domestic violence shelter. So the very beginning of your statement, your opening was there should definitely be more oversight, but then by the end you called this bill duplicative, and that's obviously a contradiction. Could you explain that? But I suspect that maybe for your 19 shelters, there is more oversight, there are more requirements, but it sounds like there are virtually none for others. That is clearly a problem. That's not okay.
So thank you for that question. Let me just clarify. So for the 19 comprehensive programs, there is oversight. The programs, the shelters I'm talking about are the ones that aren't currently associated with MNADV, which is the organization that I work for. We are the federally recognized state domestic violence coalition. And so the 19 comprehensive programs, as well as other domestic violence service providers who, for the most part, don't have shelters, are also members, and they rely on those 19 comprehensive programs. Some of them, for example, provide only legal services or culturally specific programming. So they rely on the 19 comprehensive programs for that emergency housing need when they work with a victim. So for those programs that are not already recognized as one of the 19 comprehensive programs, we would be concerned for victims if there was not some sort of oversight. Our concern, though, is that the process has not, we're sort of passing the licensing before we have the process to the licensing. And so there's a lot of concerns in that. I do think that there should be an exclusion for those 19 comprehensive programs, also a path for once a program is recognized to meet the requirements that they should have to meet, right? They should be, trauma informed, and they should be providing all of the necessary things in terms of housing that you would expect into a certain level of standard that anybody should have, even if they, especially if they're living in a shelter, we should be treating them with respect. But after that, if they're receiving federal dollars, there are tremendous barriers to allow another agency into that program. And some of the information that is being requested in here, quite frankly, might be in violation of those federal grants, and that risks the funding.
Okay, but you keep using this term oversight. Do you mean with respect to those 19 shelters, are you talking about protections on the confidentiality piece? Because what I heard from other witnesses, it was very concerning about the lack of standards, whether it's, cleanliness, safety, discrimination. These stories of discrimination by the young woman from the Eastern Shore talking about, people in a wheelchair, a transgender person, a couple that wasn't married. That to me is equally concerning, the discrimination up front as well as the conditions. You can't possibly be saying, I don't think any of you are, that there shouldn't be oversight over the physical conditions and the discrimination issue.
I think that there should be oversight for certain shelters. What I'm saying is that there currently is oversight already, because all of the 19 comprehensive programs are receiving funding through the federal government as well as through the state. And so there's already an agency that has oversight of that. And that's the Governor's Office of Crime Prevention and Policy, because they administer those grant funds. They have to apply every year. They're allowed to do site visits because that's part of the federal requirement. So there already is an agency that is involved. In addition, the State Domestic Violence Coalition, we provide training and technical assistance to all of those programs. One of my colleagues does, I think it's bi-monthly now, meetings with all the shelter directors. We're available to provide any assistance. And all of those shelters have to comply with the federal grant requirements to receive those dollars, which includes providing all of the appropriate services, meeting all of the standards, and obviously not discriminating against anybody. Everybody is accepted to these programs if they meet the requirements. And sometimes if there's even a safety concern, they've had to hotel people because they can't physically be in the shelter. If the shelter can't meet a particular victim's needs, then they'll find alternate housing. Sometimes they have to contact another county. But there already is a lack of emergency housing for victims of domestic violence. It's one of the leading causes of homelessness. And many people who are homeless have identified as being a victim of domestic violence, even if that was not the direct cause. And so we're concerned about, without some of the regulations already in place and the processes in place, what that would mean. And in addition, for these 19 comprehensive programs, there already is the oversight through the grant funding and through the assistance that they're getting through MNADV. add an additional administrative layer.
Okay, thank you for that. I do hope all of you will continue to work with Delegate Grossman on the bill and try to find consensus. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Delegate Stewart.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you all again for coming. I agree with the earlier comments about how thoughtful, your testimony is. And I think I join a lot of my colleagues in just saying, we need to try to all come together here and come up with the right answer to this. On the one hand, it seems kind of a little bit wild to me that we don't have a licensing regime at all for these shelters. At the same time, I'm not interested in creating duplicative requirements for domestic violence shelters in particular, to Ms. Shapiro's point. My question, though, is these GOCAP standards that have been referenced a couple of times. What are they? What is the current requirement under GOCAP? Do you get funding from GOCAP? What are these minimum standards that you have to, abide by?
Sure. So I'll have to get back to you on the specifics because each of the grants have their own different language in them. One of, and I referenced this, and this is sort of why we're doing this other piece of legislation right now, would empower the MNADV to certify the programs as comprehensive. So right now there's family law and then there's COMAR, and it says that they need to provide shelter, and there's some specific information regarding that, but not as detailed as probably there could be. And if we were to certify them, we would be going in and making sure that they are providing the appropriate services, meeting all of those needs. For the federal grant perspective, I would need to follow up with you on exactly what the language is. But one of my colleagues is very involved already with the housing. It's sort of a big point of intersection between domestic violence is homelessness and housing needs, because it's the overwhelming need for victims of domestic violence to have somewhere to go, because they can't leave unless they have somewhere to go, and they often go to these shelters to start. And so I will follow up with you and get that information.
Please do. That would be great. And I mean, I think just speaking for myself, obviously, if there are already minimum standards in place, let's take the amendments and exempt domestic violence shelters. If those standards are not really up to snuff, then we may need to look at maybe, beefing them up a little bit. Isn't that so?
Delegate Allen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Going back into the bill, like my colleagues all said, I think we all agree, the purpose of this bill is most definitely not to reduce the number of available beds and available space. And we definitely do not want to add any additional burdens onto the facilities that provide these services. There's been a few references, though, to the bill mandating kitchen facilities. Is that in the bill? I don't see that anywhere in the bill. I see that the bill mandates standards for food prep facilities, but not mandates the existence of them. Is that correct? Or am I misreading it?
No. Well, it says minimum to adopt building standards for minimum square footage regarding adequate heating and cooling in regards to food preparation facilities and areas. So that there would be standards that have to be set for food preparation facilities or areas. So we interpreted that as we would need something beyond what we do, because we do not prepare food at our shelter. But our individuals who access our shelter have enjoyed that aspect. And speaking from my experience as a medical provider who services individuals who experience homelessness, and I'm actually reside in a building that is actually a larger facility that is ran, that has an industrial kitchen, that has someone who is hired solely to provide those meals. That lack of kind of love, that familiarity that kind of comes from that, that is an aspect among many things that they say are lacking. And this is someone that is actually ran and has regulations that they also have to follow. So we want to keep in mind that every shelter is not for everyone, and keeping those nuances in place that allow for those individualities, because there's many reasons why people do not access shelter. But if we limit the individuality that is there, then that's going to limit access even further for clients.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you all very much. I do not see any further questions. So that concludes the bill hearing on HB 577 and includes our bill hearings. Colleagues, it is now 3:08, so we will come back at 3:15 to vote. So be in your seat at 3:15 so we can get voting. Thank you all.